Starmer and other European leaders are feeling that pressure, but I don't think troops on the ground are going to make the British public feel comfortable.
No. Keir Starmer walked round from the British embassy next door, an offer of British troops for a Ukraine peacekeeping force in his pocket.
Picture this. Keir Starmer, standing alone in a room full of European leaders, his peacekeeping proposal met with icy stares and barely concealed disdain. Now, watch as Germany's Olaf Schultz delivers the final blow, calling Starmer's plan completely premature and highly inappropriate. How did Labour's golden boy become Europe's black sheep overnight? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. As news of Keir Starmer's proposal to send British troops to Ukraine as peacekeepers spread like wildfire, European political circles were thrown into a state of disbelief. What on earth was the Labour leader thinking? Starmer's vision, ambitious as it was, seemed to completely disregard the delicate balance of power in Eastern Europe and the potential for escalation with Russia. Starmer's plan, unveiled during a press conference in London, called for a significant deployment of British forces to act as a buffer between Ukrainian and Russian troops.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says that he's ready to deploy UK troops to Ukraine to enforce a potential peace deal.
He argued that this would create a much-needed zone of stability and potentially pave the way for peace negotiations. But as details of the proposal emerged, it became clear that Starmer had severely misjudged the appetite for such a bold move among his European counterparts. The contrast between Starmer's optimism and the harsh reality of European scepticism couldn't have been starker.
You know, hot and heavy inflammatory stuff about British troops being sent across.
So the thing is, we haven't got enough troops to send anyway.
While Starmer painted a picture of British troops as harbingers of peace, European leaders saw a potential powder keg. French President Emmanuel Macron, known for his diplomatic finesse, was uncharacteristically blunt in his assessment. This is not the time for unilateral actions that could further destabilise an already volatile situation, he stated during an emergency meeting of EU leaders. So what motivated Starmer to put forward such a controversial proposal? Some political analysts suggest it was a desperate attempt to assert Britain's relevance on the world stage post-Brexit. Others see it as a miscalculated move to appeal to voters who yearn for a return to Britain's past as a global power broker. Whatever the reasoning, it's clear that Starmer failed to read the room when it came to European sentiment. The feasibility and risks of Starmer's plan came under intense scrutiny from military experts and diplomats alike. General Sir Richard Barrons, former commander of UK Joint Forces Command, didn't mince words. Inserting British troops into an active conflict zone without a clear mandate or exit strategy is a recipe for disaster. It's not peacekeeping, it's courting catastrophe.
Incredibly nervous when they wake up and see the front pages of British troops being sent over potentially onto Ukrainian soil.
You're just talking nonsense. He's not going to do that.
As the dust settled on Starmer's bombshell announcement, the question on everyone's lips was, how will this affect Britain's standing in Europe? The initial reactions suggest that the damage could be significant. German Chancellor Olaf Schultz's early departure from the Paris summit spoke volumes about the growing frustration with Britain's approach to European affairs. Starmer's proposal, far from uniting Europe in a common cause, has exposed deep rifts in European unity. It has laid bare the stark differences in how various nations view the Ukraine conflict and their role in its resolution. More worryingly for Starmer, it has positioned Britain as an outlier, a nation seemingly out of touch with the realities of modern European diplomacy.
Keir Starmer walked round from the British embassy next door, an offer of British troops for a Ukraine peacekeeping force in his pocket.
As the dust settled on Starmer's controversial proposal, an unexpected voice rose above the din of diplomatic murmurs. German Chancellor Olaf Schultz, typically a model of measured restraint, emerged as Starmer's most vocal critic. The reasons behind Germany's strong stance reveal a complex web of historical, political, and strategic considerations that threaten to unravel the fabric of European unity.
You've got to be really, really careful with this stuff because, you know, it's been years now. There's been bloodshed, lives lost, and
Schultz's initial reaction to Starmer's plan was one of barely concealed irritation. In a statement that sent shockwaves through European political circles, the German Chancellor bluntly declared, "This is highly inappropriate, to put it bluntly, and honestly, we don't even know what the outcome will be." The uncharacteristically harsh tone from Schultz caught many off guard, signalling a growing frustration among European leaders with Britain's seemingly unilateral approach to the Ukraine crisis.
Starmer and other European leaders are feeling that pressure, but I don't think troops on the ground are gonna make the British public feel comfortable.
No.
But why has Germany taken such a strong stance against Starmer's peacekeeping proposal? The answer lies in the nation's deep-rooted aversion to military interventions, a sentiment that has shaped German foreign policy since the end of World War II. This historical reluctance stems from a fear that any deployment of NATO forces could be misinterpreted by Russia as a direct escalation of the conflict, potentially dragging Europe into a wider war. Schultz's criticisms went beyond mere diplomatic niceties. He expressed particular irritation at the suggestion that discussions about troop deployments were being conducted over the heads of Ukrainians. The German Chancellor emphasised that peace talks have not even started yet, arguing that imposing a peacekeeping force before negotiations take place would be counterproductive. This stance reflects Germany's belief that security discussions must involve Ukraine directly, rather than being dictated by external powers. The fallout from Starmer's proposal and Germany's subsequent opposition has reignited a larger debate over European defence strategy.
He also called Ukraine a generational challenge and said allies in Europe would have to step up while pledging UK troops as potential peacekeepers.
During the Paris summit, Schultz openly disagreed with the concept of a European army, further highlighting the divisions within the continent over how to handle Ukraine's future and broader security concerns. As European leaders grappled with the implications of Starmer's plan, the atmosphere at the summit grew increasingly tense. Schultz's early departure from the meeting spoke volumes, signalling a growing frustration with Britain's approach to European affairs. The German Chancellor's abrupt exit left other leaders scrambling to salvage what they could from the fractured discussions.
You know, we are going to ultimately have to raise defence spending, but who's going to pay for that? Once again, that's the British taxpayer, and that might be quite a tough sell, but
As the dust settles on Starmer's ill-fated peacekeeping proposal, Britain finds itself adrift in a sea of European scepticism. The Labour leader's grand vision, once touted as a bold step towards European unity, has instead exposed the fragile nature of international alliances. European leaders, led by Germany's Olaf Schultz, have made it clear that unilateral actions are not the way forward. But what alternatives remain? German leaders have suggested a more nuanced approach, emphasising diplomatic negotiations and, crucially, involving Ukraine directly in discussions about peacekeeping forces.
Coming just hours before an emergency meeting in France, where European leaders will attempt to shore up some support for Ukraine.
This strategy aims to align any potential military involvement with Ukraine's actual needs and the broader European consensus. It's a stark contrast to Starmer's top-down approach, which seemed to prioritise British interests over collective decision-making. The fallout from this diplomatic misstep raises serious questions about Starmer's ability to navigate the treacherous waters of international politics. As Europe grapples with internal divisions, the future of collective security hangs in the balance. Will Starmer learn from this blunder, or is this the beginning of a new era of British isolation on the world stage?